Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's webcast, How to Create a Workplace Intolerant of Harassment. This event is part of the SHRM webcast series. You can learn about upcoming and on-demand programs from our e-newsletters and the webcast homepage at shrm.org/webcast. SHRM thanks today's sponsor, Go1, for making this program available to the HR community. And now about today's program. When it comes to preventing workplace harassment, establishing rules, training, and education are critical. But relying solely on these measures to prevent or address sexual harassment isn't enough to prevent workplace harassment. Today's program will focus on the critical element, changing your workplace culture. To moderate our panel today, I'm pleased to welcome Carolyn Brandt of Go1. I'll turn things over to her to introduce herself, the rest of today's speakers, and get our program underway. Ms. Brandt?
Thanks very much, Mike. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Today we are looking forward to a great discussion. Please feel free to send your questions through the Q&A. We'll try to pepper them in throughout our discussion. Today we're going to discuss several things, what today's fight against sexual harassment looks like, current policies that are working and not working in organizations, challenges and barriers to changing workplace cultures and what they look like, solutions we can provide to help our employees, teams, and community, and how we can prioritize changing workplace culture so that it's intolerant of harassment. I'm going to introduce myself, and then I'll rely on the other panelists to each introduce themselves. Again, my name is Carolyn Brandt. I'm a global learning specialist at Go1. I've spent 20 years in learning and development, started as a technical writer, and have spent most of my career developing learning content and programs within organizations. I'd like to introduce Sonia, who will give you a little information about herself.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Carolyn. Hello, everyone. My name is Sonia Mathai, and I am the Chief Human Resources Officer at Globality. We're about a 200-person startup headquartered in the Silicon Valley with offices across the globe. My experience spans across both large and smaller-sized companies. Globality is my fourth startup, and I really pride myself in building a foundation of HR that can really scale alongside high-growth companies. So I'm looking forward to sharing my learnings over the years with you, as well as our current practices at Globality related to harassment.
Thank you so much. How about you, Cindy?
Hi, everyone. This is Cindy Paschal, and I am one of the co-founders and CEO of Vado. Vado is an off-the-shelf e-learning courseware provider. And prior to starting Vado 10 years ago, I started my career and have over 20 years of experience in HR, training, development, and OD. And so today, as I answer questions and do this presentation, I'll have both hats on, HR, training, development, as well as a content developer of sexual harassment training.
Excellent. And then you, Tom.
Thanks, Carolyn. Good afternoon, everyone. I've owned a training and consulting business for the past 24 years, and I help clients build stronger teams by coaching leaders and mediating conflicts and trying to teach employees how to be better team players. I'm on this panel, I think, today, though, because I've delivered more than 500 sexual harassment prevention sessions over the years in just about every imaginable business. And surprisingly, I found that I actually liked delivering them. These days, it seems like though my attention is now focused on remote teamwork, and I'm glad to be here today.
Thank you so much. And I wanted to especially thank all of you. You all work in the HR space, and I know the last few weeks have been incredibly challenging. So I appreciate that you were still able to dedicate some time to this today. So let's get started. Real quick about Go1 and Vado. Go1 is a digital learning subscription service. We have a library of over 60,000 courses, and one of our favorite partners is Vado, who provides some of the content that we utilize for our customers. So don't answer the question yet in the Q&A because we will actually have a poll question area next, but I wanted to put this question in front of you guys first. Think about it, and then we'll move to answering it on the next slide. What is the current state of your company's harassment training? A, active company-wide training. B, implementing training based on state requirements. C, not currently implementing training but plan to, and no plans to implement training. So on this slide, you can actually select your answer. I have been advised to give about 30 seconds to let the poll technology catch up so that we can see everyone's answers. So just remember to get your answer in, and we'll wait just a few more seconds. So hopefully everyone has answered. We're going to give it just a few more seconds, and then I will move to the answers so we can see the results. And we have some additional questions for the panelists as well. Don't forget, you can send your questions as we discuss in the Q&A below. All right, let's see what our answers are. So it looks like most of you are active company-wide training, so 52%, which is great. And then there's 5% that has no plans. So I'd love to hear your response to the poll questions, Tom. What do you think about these answers?
It doesn't surprise me. Between the active and the implementing, I mean, that looks like it's about 80%. And it seems like it's pretty rare these days that you run into a company that hasn't or isn't doing anything. So it seems about what I would have expected.
Makes sense. Okay, so I'm going to start with a question to Sonia. What can you recommend tips for creating a respectful and healthy culture within your organization?
Yeah, you know, I do think that respect and a healthy culture starts absolutely, you know, at the top. I think that, you know, you can't think of another subset of folks in your organization that would play a bigger role than your leadership in creating a culture of respect. We emulate their behaviors, and that's why it's really important that when you do have leadership changes or bring in new leadership, that they also very importantly align with the company values. I'll give you a quick example. In a previous company, I had an amazing leader who was highly respected, did all the right things, was very well liked. He hired a brilliant technologist into his 23-person team who was that classic textbook jerk, and, you know, was described to me in HR as, you know, verbally being a bully. And I think we all saw the unraveling of these types of people over the last couple of years, where leadership did not take action promptly enough and allow these people to exhibit disrespect and bad behaviors across the organization at a huge expense to team members across the company. So, you know, it's really our obligation as HR to commit that we're enforcing rules around harassment and acceptable behaviors in a very unbiased, standardized way across the organization. You know, move fast, move smart when you do experience situations where you are finding that you're not holding yourself accountable to being respectful to one another. You've got bad behaviors happening across the organization. You know, in this situation, we did eventually let the individual go, but it did come at an expense for not only the manager, but his team as well. I do want to stress, though, that although leaders are critical in building respectful cultures, you know, I do want to challenge you to create a culture where all employees, you know, do feel equally responsible for it. I really encourage my teams to put into the culture what they want to get out of it, so that this burden is not only on HR and leadership, but it's spread across your employee base.
Sonia, this is
great.
Cindy.
Thank you so much.
This is Cindy. I was just going to comment on Sonia's response and actually kind of cheer on the addition that it's every team member's responsibility to treat others with dignity and respect. And you're right, it starts with leaders, and everyone is responsible.
Excellent. And so to mostly to Tom, I think, and Sonia right now, but have any of you seen employers who have established internal sexual harassment committees to help with this process?
You know, I haven't. I wouldn't. If I have seen anything, it wouldn't be a sexual harassment committee. There might be a committee that would be sort of like the culture, like a culture committee, and they're probably working on things that are more. It's sort of more positive. So you know, how do we create a more respectful workplace? How do we make a sort of a more positive place? I personally have not seen like a sexual harassment prevention committee.
And, you know, to that point, Carolyn, I think, you know who your harassment committee is. It's every employee in the company. They should all be very well versed on the process, how to identify it, to feel empowered to escalate it. And so I feel that we naturally should have a committee of people, if you train them properly and arm them with the right tools, you've got your committee right there.
Yes, that's a really good point. So Cindy, when a company embarks on a sexual harassment program, where does the activity start? Are you starting with defining sexual harassment policies or with providing state-required and mandated sexual harassment training?
Yeah, this is Cindy, and I want to kind of go back to what Tom said. He hasn't seen a committee that is around sexual harassment. It's usually around culture, and and to me, that's where the sexual harassment program starts. It starts with your company culture and your values, and the values shape. The values are woven into a company's code of conduct policy, and then they're finally into the sexual harassment policy and the training that goes with the sexual harassment policy. That's not the starting point, is what I'm saying. The starting point is a couple of steps backwards, where you're defining culture, defining values, putting those values into your code of conduct, and the sexual harassment policy is a byproduct of your code of conduct.
Yeah, Tom, do you have anything to add there?
I agree. I agree with what Cindy's saying. I also would acknowledge that, I mean, there clearly are two different kinds of organizations out there. So when I'm thinking about the HR people today, and they're like, okay, we got to do something about this, and then you start talking to senior leadership, you know, not everyone's going to be jumping up and down like this is a thing that they really want to do. So, I mean, the reality might be your goal very well might be either compliance or risk mitigation. And if that's it, that's it. Now, I wish it wasn't that way, but if it is, and that's what you're working with, then sort of your next steps are going to be very different than if you're taking a more proactive, sort of what I would think of as a more positive approach of trying to build a respectful culture. The fact is that you're not going to get everybody who's going to want to go that way.
Yeah, good point. No, that makes perfect sense. Sonia, anything to add?
No, I completely agree with it. Yeah, it's spot on.
Excellent. Okay, so we're going to move to another poll here. Again, don't answer here. I'll move to the actual slide where you can answer the questions, but this is just something to look at and think about. What signs do you look for to determine that your company may have a harassment issue? Young workforce, alcohol is part of the culture, lack of diversity, power disparity, and other. And you can select more than one response. So if you want to pick one or more things here, and we could also, if you choose other, feel free to add to the Q&A what your others are, if you'd like to add those as part of the conversation. But we'll give this 15 more seconds or so people can get all of their answers in. And don't forget, you can ask any other questions within the Q&A below as well. I see a few coming in, and I will get to them as we go. Okay, in just a few more seconds, we'll move to see the results here. All right, let's see. Okay, so power disparity definitely won by the most votes. Lack of diversity, alcohol, part of the work culture, and it's nice to see young workforce doesn't necessarily mean that we'll have a harassment issue. So, Sonia, how do you interpret these results?
Well, you know, I do agree with the way they shook out. I think that, you know, power and how it's distributed and how it's perceived across the organization is very important. And I think that, again, if you have individuals who are in positions of influence and decision-making and power, and they are allowing behaviors around them to continue that are not acceptable, I think you're going to start to see just morale around those individuals go down. I think you're going to start to see people who were perhaps more extroverted start to become more introverted. There are signs that we can recognize as HR professionals based on, the individuals that are in power. How are people around them acting, reacting, responding to harassment? So the poll results don't surprise me.
It's interesting too. So I'm looking through the Q&A and I can see the others that people commented. Weak leadership, all of the above, leaders who do not model appropriate behavior. When the dominant culture is from the East Asia, treatment of women does not follow U.S. norms. So definitely, I mean, they're all cultural things to consider as well. What do you think about that, Tom?
Yeah, this question's a good one, and you got to think about why it's here. It's because, I mean, let's say again you're trying to sell leadership on kind of implementing some sort of anti-harassment program. The pushback you're going to most likely get is the first one is, well, we don't have a problem, and they're going to want to know, like, what's your evidence that we do? And first of all, you might start with, there isn't a workplace out there that doesn't have some of this kind of thing going on. So you could start there, but you might also back it up with results that you get from engagement surveys or just your observation of employees and leaders themselves. I mean, people showing up in your office complaining about these things is a pretty obvious sign. Now, another thing you might get, though, then is kind of a counter to that from other leaders as well. How many claims do we have? And if you maybe the answer is that you don't have that many. But here's what you got to be ready for: is that when the EEOC studied this not that many years ago, they found that the vast majority, I think the number was north of 70% is what they used. Those incidents don't get reported to anybody. So we have to assume that most of the sexual harassment is not being reported and not showing up in stats, and they're not going to want to hear this. But if you tell your leaders, if we do this well, we're actually going to get more claims. Now, again, some of these factors that you have up here, I think that the EEOC had actually a bigger, longer list to work with, and it's just, I think sometimes you got to look at your workforce and your workplace and say, do we have anything unique? There's a couple more I might add that aren't on the poll, and like, do most of your workers depend on tips, for example? They feel like they're forced to put up with a whole lot more than maybe they wish they would have to put up with, or do you have workers that are kind of working in isolated conditions? I'm thinking about, say, people cleaning offices or hotel rooms, and they're out there working by themselves. So there's, you can look at some of these factors and say, we have some of these in our workplace, which makes the risk go up, but there's also just a lot of it going on all over, and you got to be ready to sort of prove that to people if you want to try to get your program going.
And Carolyn,
that's
to that
really
point, this is Sonia again. I think, sorry, yeah. One last point. I think that's so important because one of the comments that came up just now was around cultural differences. And I think that's tying directly into, D&I initiatives now are tying and correlating to harassment. Like the two are intertwining day by day because we are starting to educate our workforce on different types of, we're adding diverse people to the organization. We're global now, so we're more acceptable of different types of norms and standards. So I think the two are starting to run very concurrently, and our initiatives are representative of that as well.
And to that point, I thought this was an interesting statement that someone just posted. They're struggling with not being able to find enough workers. So they're hiring people that they normally would not have considered in the past. That's adding to their challenge, probably not just with sexual harassment, just with their culture in general. So here's another question. How does an HR professional identify power play when everything seems fine in the team culture? Cindy, do you have anything to add here?
That's a really good question. Sometimes you have to look at other things when everything seems fine, and it very well could not be. So maybe the company does a engagement survey or an employee satisfaction survey, and if there's a department that's running below average by statistically significant amount, you might want to ask some questions there. If there's a turnover that's higher coming from one area, including internal transfers, those people just want to get away from that boss, you might want to look into it. You got to look for offhanded comments. So I don't know how many of you heard that when Katie Couric stopped working with Matt Lauer, who later was fired for sexual harassment, she commented that she was not going to miss being pinched. That's an offhanded comment that needed to be explored. And if you're getting some level of offhanded comments, you gotta scratch that a little bit and figure out what's behind those comments.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Tom, I did want to take a few minutes to discuss the EEOC risk factors, and I felt like you were the most appropriate person to talk us through this.
Sure. We've already mentioned a few of these, but you just have to think about it a little bit, like why would some of these, why would they be a risk factor? So, lack of diversity. If you think about, there's a really strong majority, and majorities tend to sort of shun people that are sort of in the minority. I mean, that's, unfortunately the way it sometimes goes. So if there's not much diversity, you could say there's going to be some people that might be on the sort of the wrong end of that deal, and you just kind of got to watch out for that. Changing gender roles. Boy, there was a movie a long time ago, actually 1987, North Country was the movie, and it was, I'm from Minnesota, and it was about the women working in the mines in northern Minnesota. And the women had always worked in the office, and the men were out in the mining the ore. But the movie was about some women had wanted to go out and work in some of those in the mining operations because it paid better, and plus I think they were just interested in it. Well, the men, they didn't like that. And whenever these changes start happening, people get, I guess they feel threatened, or they just don't think it's the right thing. And so they start creating problems. We've already talked about isolated workers, cultural language differences. There could be people that, sometimes they say and do things that get misinterpreted because of language, but that's probably not it. I mean, I think people can kind of understand an inappropriate, overture in just about any language, even if there's no words involved. But there are cultural issues that come in where some cultures have different standards about how we treat each other. Especially, you start thinking about how affectionate one culture might be versus another. And so someone who grew up in a culture who's just used to hugging everybody and being very affectionate, and you mix that with some folks that are just the opposite, those behaviors are going to become are going to easily be misinterpreted as, like a sexual come on, when maybe that wasn't the case at all. Just two more I want to mention that we haven't talked about yet. I think number 5, where we talk about monotonous work. This sounds funny. It's like, well, people are bored, and when they're bored, they behave badly because they're trying to find some ways to entertain themselves. And then if we get down to it's under power disparities, but it's kind of another version of it. It's just the superstars, and I'm particularly thinking about like sales superstars. And one of the questions I think you asked Cindy a little while ago is like, well, what if it's kind of like you don't really see it? How do you know it's there? And I'm thinking about like organizations where somebody makes a sale, and this, sometimes you'll see this where they'll ring a bell or something, and everybody will be out there, and we're all supposed to be, clapping and cheering for the person who brought in the big sale. And yet people look at that person and say, you kind of hear a little if you're out in the audience, you kind of hear some grumbling like, oh yeah, that person, right? And, and they all sort of know. But the question is like, if you as an HR person, you find out about it, or a senior manager finds out about it, are they willing to do something? And sometimes it's really hard because, this person is bringing in a lot of sales and nobody really wants to mess with that. And so, I think that's why that one ends up on the list as well.
Great, thank you very much. So Sonia, I have a question that I have for you, but then I see a question from the audience that I'm going to tie two things together. So my question is, what skills are necessary to develop a change in workplace culture? But and to add to that, how do you stop rumors from spreading in large offices? One of our audience members works in a large office with a younger workforce, and this is often a big issue they run into. Are you there, Sonia?
I would say that rumors are
we're having a little bit of an audio issue with you, Sonia. So I'm going to push the answer over to Cindy. Cindy, can you help us with this question?
Yeah, I'm going to take the culture piece of it, and it's because it sounded like Sonia was going to talk about rumors.
Go ahead, Cindy.
Okay, I thought Sonia was trying to come back on. Well,
can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Oh, we can hear you now, Sonia.
Okay, sorry about that. So I was going to say, rumors are interesting because they start when employees clearly don't have the proper communication coming from leadership. Rumors start when people don't have answers. And so they start to, create outcomes on their own. There's anxiety that's heightening. And change in itself is a very interesting word. You have some folks that are excited with change, and you've got others that have a visceral reaction to it. So we know change is inevitable in HR, right? Make it a positive thing. Lessen the anxiety for your employees when they hear the word change. Be transparent about the why. Be transparent about the how. Your role really as an HR partner is to work with leaders really to make sure that employees are understanding why they're doing the things that we're asking them to do. Do the same with your initiatives. Be clear about why HR is prioritizing harassment or other learning and development initiatives you administer, in the future, and tie them back to your company goals and values. You're going to establish and build a really, really trusting relationship with employees. And what that does is it moves you away from being perceived as traditional HR, right? Like an administrative support function. We're getting to your checklist because you have to. What we're doing today, what we're doing right now at this very moment is talking about modern HR, right? Modern HR is relevant to our employees. It has an invaluable purpose beyond hiring and firing. And you're going to be surprised with the response. Employees will be more inclined to become culture advocates versus, talking at the water cooler about what they don't know.
So one of our audience participants says, rumors and gossip are a performance issue. Identify them as such and manage from a performance issue. Make it part of the code of conduct and hold people accountable. What do you think about that?
I mean, look, talk and chatter amongst employees is going to happen. I think what we need to do is arm enough employees with the facts, with the so that they're able to properly guide and properly inform in a transparent way. It's never going to not be there. but hopefully you have enough advocates across the company that can help to shut it down or at least clarify to the facts.
Okay, that's great.
This is Tom.
So,
Tom, I want to jump in on this too, Carolyn, if I can. I think Sonia's right. I think rumors are a symptom of sort of a lack of information, but that's just one kind of rumor. And I think there's another kind of rumor, and it probably is more applicable when we're talking about harassment, and it's sort of ripping on your coworkers, particularly for, because of some protected class. When we happen to be talking about the protected class of sex and gender here, but it could be anything, and that's where if there's a lot of rumors because of information, to me that's a systems problem, and that's sort of like we have to figure out how to build our information or communication systems. But if so and so is going around trash talking a coworker, that's a whole different story, and that's where we get to this idea if it's a performance problem. I mean, you gotta stop that like right now, because that's so damaging.
So, Cindy, talk us through the key components of a respectful workplace.
Yes, I think that's really simple. The key components of a respectful workplace include treating all team members with respect, regardless of status, whether it be age, gender, ethnic background, disability status, religion, and any of the other statuses. And the list of statuses can include things that the government decides are on that list, and it can also include things like tattoos, piercings, things that might be considered a little bit, and you guys can't see me, I'm saying odd with quote, the air quotes around it, different from me. And then me could be anybody in the audience, and it's just really treating people that with dignity and respect, regardless of anything that could be considered different than me. Leaders model that behavior, and they take action when team members are not modeling that behavior. And it's team members, to Sonia's earlier point, it's team members calling out that lack of respectful behavior and just saying, dude, that's not okay. And putting the person on notice that it's, that it is not okay to treat people like that.
Yeah, and so Tom,
one more point, Carolina, though. Please, sorry, just one more point to this. What's really worked for me, and some of you will experience perhaps something similar when you go through a major organizational shift, or when there is a realignment or restructuring of teams, or you've had massive growth in your company, and so there's a lot of new people getting to know each other, how they work together. I've really found that's been useful for me to offer opportunities in which employees get more personal time to get to know each other. And when they get to know each other at a personal level about their experiences, their families, their hobbies, there's this organic mutual respect for one another that just evolves. And it really helps as employees go back to their remote locations or their different offices, and you know the personality of that individual, so you know how to interpret the communication, whether it's via a text message or an email or a quick Slack message, because you've invested in the time of getting to know who that person is as an individual. So I do think that companies need to stress the importance of carving out time for social gatherings and social opportunities where people can get to know one another in an informal way.
I think that's a really good point. And from personal experience, I have had that, especially working at Go1 the last few years. Every time we get together and spend time getting to know each other, communication improves across the board. So I definitely like what you just said there. So given everything that's going on right now, two questions. Is now even a good time to be conducting sexual harassment training? And are you adjusting, or should you be making adjustments to the way you're training and what you're training on, given people are now working from home? Is there advice you have for digital sexual harassment training? Sonia, do you have any answers there?
Yes. Look, I think that harassment can happen in any form, regardless of this current climate that we're in. You know, we do have employees that go on trips with coworkers, they go to conferences with coworkers, and I think that, you know, it doesn't have to be an in-office education. I think what we're doing differently now at Globality is really encouraging our employees to be mindful of how and what they're writing. Right, and so, you know, written form and writing can also be a form of harassment that we haven't really necessarily paid a lot of attention to in the past. It's been more physical and visual cues that have identified harassment. And so now we have to, you know, I think the reporting process stays the same. You know, we have to make sure that people feel that that is consistent. But how we are stressing the importance of what you write, what you post, you know, whether it's a political view or a joke, now that we're all kind of communicating via these messaging tools, we're starting to emphasize more of the thoughtfulness behind what you're posting, how it can be interpreted by readers across the company. So we're stressing more the importance on that piece inside Globality.
Interesting. Tom or Cindy, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, the first part of your question. Tom, do you mind if I step in first?
No, go for it.
Okay. All right. The first part of the question was, given that you know, everything that's going on, is now a good time to conduct sexual harassment training? And Sonia talked about, you know, the digital sexual harassment. So, in terms of is now a good time to conduct sexual harassment training, I think it is. I think you know, during normal times, the biggest excuse people give around sexual harassment training is, I don't have time. I'm way too busy. And now things are, you have a lot of industries with, you know, that have more time. And so get your compliance, you know, training done while your people have the time to do it.
Tom, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I think there is one more element that makes us even a little tougher with the sort of the whole digital sexual harassment, because, you know, you hang out with people at work all day and pretty soon you feel kind of friendly with them, and instead of just communicating via email or whatever formal company chat system you're using, people start, you know, connecting on Facebook and Instagram and all these other tools, as social media tools as well. And, you know, they're not necessarily used to censoring themselves. But now the question becomes is, well, do I have to or not? And there's not really clear answers about this. I mean, you can start thinking about things like, I post some sort of risque comment on Facebook and I had connected with you earlier. Does that mean I sexually harassed you? Probably not. If I post a risque comment and I tag you in it, that starts feeling a little bit more directed. And so there's a lot of, it's sort of like the Wild West right now, trying to sorting all that out. But again, to Sonia's point about just getting people to be thinking about, you know, whether it is on a company communication system or a private system that you're using, I mean, you really got to think about what are you saying, who are you saying it to, and who's it visible to.
Yeah, totally. So Tom, while I have you, what if it's someone in leadership in HR that is acting inappropriately? How do people proceed?
Hit me with that one more time. I didn't quite hear it.
So a couple of people have asked similar questions. So one said people are scared to report top management bullying or harassment because they're scared about retaliation. Another person said, what if someone in leadership or HR is acting inappropriately? What's the best way to proceed?
Yeah. This is, I mean, depending on where you live, but I mean, most governments are going to have some sort of system for you. So, I mean, the first bit of advice is to always, try to work it out inside the company if you can. So I go to whatever the policy says. I go to my HR person, I go to my manager. If it's, especially start thinking about small companies, if it's a small company and you get to the top and that person sort of at the top is the problem, that doesn't give you a lot of other options within the company. So then you have to start thinking about what are my external options. So, for instance, in the U.S., every state is going to have some version of a human rights commission or agency, and they are there so that you can, they can help you with these kinds of things. So you can go online, figure out who it is in your state. They usually have a page on their website that says, here's the system, here's the process. A lot of times you can even call them or chat with them without formally complaining. You're not making a complaint yet. You're just trying to get some information. So they'll tell you how it works, and then you can still decide if you want to go that route. If once you've done that, there's also the EEOC they can step into these things as well. And, you always have the right to go talk to a lawyer if you need some help as well. I mean, those are all external options, but they're there just for that reason, for companies that, aren't going to take this thing seriously.
Are we still on?
I wonder if one of our participants may have their lines muted.
Oh, I apologize. That was my fault. Sonia,
our moderator's gone away.
I know, that's terrible. I was like, why is no one answering me? Sonia, did you have anything to add to Tom, or should I move on to the question that I just asked to myself on mute?
Well, just briefly, I think it's so unfortunate and disappointing for me as an HR professional. If any employee feels that they can't go to someone in the organization that they trust, even if it's not your manager, even if it's not HR, but someone in a leadership position, like Tom said, you may want to just evaluate if it's even the right company for you, because it is disheartening to think that we have so many individuals that go too long in unhealthy environments. There are options out there, but please, I really encourage you to try and find someone internally that is an advocate that you feel has a voice that can help you navigate through the issue.
And can I add one more thing, Carolyn? Sure. We think about our audience today, and I'm sure you want to be able to say, here's the policy, here's who you can go to inside, and it's hard to say, and oh, by the way, if you want to take it outside of the organization, here's how you do that.
Yeah.
But, I think you should. I mean, because I've had people, I've written things about sexual harassment on my website, and people have done some searches. I've had people call me up and just ask, like, I don't know what to do. My manager's doing this, and his boss isn't doing anything about it, and they're just at a loss. And and then I tell them about, like, well, where do you live? And here's the agency, and it's a huge relief. And I think we need to at least give that option. I mean, we're not going to encourage it because we're going to take care of it on the inside, hopefully, 99% of the time. But in terms of the information you're putting out there, and especially in some of the states that require sexual harassment training, it's not an option. You have to tell people in the state of New York, this is the agency you go to. Here's their phone number. Here's their website. I mean, you got to put that in the training. So, it'd be good if everyone just sort of did that up front.
That's great. So I want to shift to content a little bit. We have like 15 minutes left, so I want to get a few different types of questions in here. So Cindy, talk to me about, under normal circumstances, what your thoughts on live in-person training versus live webinar versus on-demand training?
Thank you. That's really going to depend on your organization. If everyone is in one facility doing a live training session under normal circumstances, because right now we're not in normal circumstances, a 1-hour training is going to be appropriate. You might want to put employees in one group, managers in a different group, so you're addressing things that are specific to what you need your managers to do. But that model doesn't work very well for a really geographically dispersed workforce, because it's cost prohibitive to bring people together to do instructor-led training. So then you enter into either virtual training, doing something similar to like this webinar format, or online training, e-learning courses. And there's some pros and cons with the live as well. Having a time that is dedicated for people to be in that session, that might not work on everyone's schedule. And then you're into, if for those people that cannot attend during that scheduled time, then it's recorded and they watch it when they can go through it. And now you're getting really close to e-learning courses, and with an e-learning course, you have all the record keeping that if you're in one of the states that requires the sexual harassment training, you need the record keeping. In the other 43 states, Tom mentioned earlier about mitigating your risk, and training is a really good way to mitigate your risk. You're going to want training records, even if you're in one of the 43 states that does not require the training. So there's a lot of pros on the off-the-shelf e-learning course, sexual harassment courseware. Tom, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I do want to add one other thing. If I think about like today's format, I mean, if you're here, you can kind of interact a little bit. You can ask your questions. But if you're not here, and then you watch it later as on demand, and this is what Cindy was saying, it starts feeling like courseware then, online learning, e-learning. But I actually think it's not as good in that format. If the plan is to grab it on demand, courseware is written for that purpose. It's designed with that in mind. So you start building in the interactivity, knowing that people aren't going to be able to ask a live question. You build that in. And so, I mean, anyone who doesn't show up today and ends up watching this later, I don't think the experience is going to be as good as being here today. And that's why, so if you're going the on-demand thing, you'd want to go with sort of the online learning. And then one other thing to take into consideration is you start thinking about your workforce. Do they have access to computers and mobile devices, and do they know how to use them? I mean, there's a lot of industries, and I was just talking to a woman the other day, an HR person who wanted to, talking about online learning, and she all once discovered, she goes, well, most of my folks work on the shop floor, and they don't know how to do this. And so she was, needing to do something live. So that's, obviously a big consideration too.
Yeah, we've even had organizations who, in that situation, do video broadcast, but in groups of people, so that there's a responsible person there for displaying and taking care of the technology while everyone there can watch it together.
Right.
So Sonia, I got a question that's a little controversial, but I'm going to see your answer here. So what are your thoughts regarding consensual supervisor to subordinate relationships in the organization?
Oh, goodness. Supervisor to subordinate, no. I don't. I think that, I think there was a study that just came out this week where it said 1 in 3 individuals in the workforce have some type of a relationship with a coworker. However, where companies draw the line is in that managerial kind of reporting relationship. I do want to actually add a point to the previous question that I think is very important, and it ties back into this one. You know, we do all do the compliance training, which is standardized across states based on your role in the company. But we have a huge opportunity with our employees to take it one step further. And I call it, you know, internally at Globality, to globalicize the learnings from the online training and make it relevant to us. You know, what do we define as no tolerance? Is that relationships between a supervisor and an employee? Because those are subjective. Those are, companies decide internal dating policies. So this is an opportunity for us to take online learning and make it our own, and make it tangible, and tie it to our values, tie it to our goals, and be very clear and very transparent about what we tolerate and what we don't inside of our organizations.
Yeah, and you know, I was thinking a lot about your statement about transparency and communication. So if there has been a sexual harassment incident in a company that was investigated and acted on, what do company and HR leaders do next?
Well, you know, there is an investigation, right? And I think that's where, Tom, your point resonates a lot, because, you know, sure, if an individual does go in external and report harassment, there will be some type of investigation, and people fear that during that investigation, they will somehow be identified. And that's where we see the reporting of harassment claims suppress and go down. It's the fear of being identified. And we're doing all the right things, and we have the right intent, which is to protect the identity of these people. But I think it's, you know, when folks start to understand the investigation process and hearing both sides, it's a little nerve-wracking. And I think that's where we see reports start to go down.
Yeah. So, and Tom, can you talk about signs that HR should be paying attention to that could indicate that there's a problem with sexual harassment that no one's talking about?
You know, I think we actually hit this a little bit earlier. To me, it's just like you just gotta keep your ears open. I mean, I had a woman one time who came up and said, "Oh, this coworker I've got, he's such a weirdo." And, you know, I mean, you could just leave it at that. But I said, well, what's he doing? And before long, she starts telling me things like, the men's and the women's restrooms have an adjoining wall. And when he sees this, one of his female coworkers go into the women's restroom, he goes into the men's restroom and starts pounding on the wall. And I'm like, seriously? I said, that's a big problem. And she goes, oh no, he's just goofy. And I'm like, he's not just goofy. That's just totally, you can't do that. And so I think sometimes employees will give you clues. They're not going to come out and say, you know, Bob is sexually harassing me, but they're going to say things that if you just dig in a little bit, it's not going to take long before you uncover, okay, this is a problem. So just keep your eyes open and ask really good questions.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And so, Cindy, we've talked about a few different examples, but do you have any other additional examples of successful programs that you've seen firsthand that yielded great results?
In terms of sexual harassment training, I'm going to sound a little biased here. We offer a training course called Respectful Workplace. That's sexual harassment training, and it really kind of encompasses a lot of what we talked about today, treating people with dignity and respect.
Yeah, that's great. So, Tom, someone's asking for clarification, and I'm going to bear with me while I try to understand what they're asking. It was something you stated when mentioning listing the agency that one would file a formal complaint with. They're asking if that's a legal requirement, listing in the handbook and specifically in the harassment policy section, the contact information for the agency to report harassment. So I guess they're asking, what if you have employees all over the country? Are you supposed to be listing all of the various agencies?
So I'm thinking about the 6 states that require sexual harassment training. And when you go into the law and you say, okay, well, what do they say about it? I can't say off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure most, if not all, will say you've got to say, here's who you call in terms of in Maine or Delaware or Illinois or whoever. Here's who you can contact. Obviously, in the other 43 states or 44 states that don't have any requirements, you don't have to do training at all, really. That's just you. So obviously, you don't have to tell people who to report it to. But in the states that you do, it seems to me you'd want to review what the law says for your state and what the training requirements are, and whether or not it goes into policy. That I can't remember, but you could check that because they'll usually say, here's what's got to be in your policy, here's what's got to be in your training.
All right, perfect. All right, we've got time for one question. Sonia, I'm going to throw it at you. So if you've done your sexual harassment training and checked the boxes, but you don't see employees actually adjusting their own behaviors, do you have suggestions for how to get beyond course completion?
Yeah, and that's where my amazing HR business partner team comes in, which is to be very transparent in the feedback. Every individual is establishing a brand for themselves within a company. And I think our assumption is that all people want to do the best work and they have the best intentions. Our job as HR is to come back around and say, hey, look, this is how your actions are resonating across your peers. So I think it's really HR and our partnership with individuals directly to give real-time feedback, support them with a plan of action and course correction, and be clear about the perception that they're building across the organization, because ultimately people are doing great work, they're working hard, they want their work to be impactful, and I would assume that if you are coming back with feedback that is balanced, has a positive outcome, that shows you're being authentic about wanting to help them, that you're going to find folks are very, very receptive to your feedback because they want to get better.
That's great. So thank you very much to our panelists for their participation. Mike, I think at this point I toss it back to you.
Yes, and we have just a couple quick closing announcements. Please stay with us if you can. SHRM thanks Go1 for sponsoring this program. Go1's learning solutions help thousands of companies train and upskill their diverse employees at every level and in every industry. Go1's courseware and technology can be integrated with existing learning management systems quickly and efficiently. Go1 offers more than 60,000 e-learning courses in its digital library and provides access to personal content advisors and learning strategists. When you subscribe, you'll gain the opportunity to increase employee retention and engagement, improve leadership development and onboarding programs, and reduce compliance risk. To learn more or to book a demo, visit go1.com. Finally, before we do sign off, we have a few thanks. First to our presenters, Tom LaForce of LaForce Teamwork Services, Sonia Mathai from Globality, Cindy Paschal from Vado, and Carolyn Brandt of Go1. Thank you for the insight you shared today, and we want to thank our audience for joining in and for choosing SHRM for HR Webcast. That concludes today's program.